Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. This is Season 3, Episode 7. Today we are on Chapter 8 of Queen Andraya. Here we go. Chapter 8, Stumping the Nobles. Andraya stood outside the threshold of the royal council room. She needed one extra breath before entering the political battlefield. She spotted Chancellor Dolion speaking with Marquis Draven. Dolion saw her first. Andraya wished she could have captured his expression and plastered it on canvas. Shock and admiration mingled on his face. Andraya forced herself not to grin. Despite her decision not to wear her fitted dress that borderlined scandalous, the red, sleek, slender one she chose seemed to cause a similar effect. On the Chancellor, at least. "Dolion, are you even listening to me?" the Marquis asked. Then Draven glanced in the direction Dolion was staring. His eyes bulged, but he snapped out of it quickly. Once Dolion realized Andraya had caught him, he gave her a pronounced scowl. Andraya smiled in return. She stepped inside the spacious room and found the same boisterous scene as she had the day prior. Some stood near the tall flowering hibiscus plants, others near a bronze statue of a famous Chaldrayan general, while the remaining gentlemen sat at the long silver table. Just when she reminded herself that it was of no consequence that Prince Stefan was missing, she spotted him. Besnik was beside him, speaking with his hands as usual. But Stefan did not appear to be paying attention to him, as he held a very similar expression to the one Dolion had. Yet somehow this made his eyes all the brighter. Besnik shifted in her direction and beamed. "Your Majesty, you look magnificent!" He took a few steps toward her and bowed. Stefan did the same, but he took her hand and kissed it, all the while keeping his eyes on hers. Then his countenance shifted from admiration to shock. "What is it, Your Highness?" the Queen asked. "This is acceptable in your culture, yes?" the Prince asked. "Indeed, sir," she said with a smile. "Your Chaldrayan really is quite good. Why does Her Majesty look—" He paused to ask Besnik a question. "Suspicious," Besnik answered for him. Andraya lifted her eyebrows up and down. "Well, sometimes I cannot help but wonder if you really did know what your translator was up to. I still have not discovered his motivation for deception." Stefan tilted his head in disappointment. He opened his mouth to speak, but Dolion beat him to it. "Your Majesty, you are officially late in starting this meeting," he called loudly for all to hear. This caused the room to quiet down, and all eyes to shift to the Queen, which rewarded her with dropped jaws and a few flushed faces. Andraya couldn't help but notice Bartholomew's face transformed to resemble a bushy-haired cherry. She met a few of their eyes with raised eyebrows. Each time she did so, the man either cleared his throat or looked away quickly. Then Earl William, an older, taller gentleman, fixed his thick glasses and stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow. Then all others in the room followed suit. Andraya gave him a nod of appreciation for taking the lead in what others should have done. The Queen shifted to face Dolion and gave him a sly smile. "A queen is never late, Chancellor. I will begin when I am ready." The Chancellor inched his way toward her until he stood next to her and the Prince. He glared at Stefan with obvious disdain. Stefan held his stare with confidence. "And may I ask when that might be?" Dolion said gruffly. "As soon as I speak with you in private," Andraya replied. Prince Stefan cleared his throat and stepped back, earning him an evil grin from Dolion. "Carry on with your musings," Andraya told the rest of the men, who still stood silent. Slowly the room filled with chatter again, and Dolion turned to the Queen in earnest. "Have you changed your mind?" Andraya lifted an eyebrow. "Are you inquiring if I have decided to allow you to all but take over the head crown?" "Indeed not, sir." Dolion scowled again. "Then to what do I owe this pleasure?" he said through his teeth. "I would like to inform you that I have chosen a new royal advisor." Dolion's eyes widened with anger. "You must be mad, madam." Andraya could feel her temper flaring. It's just one of the many wise choices I will make for Chaldrea." Dolion barked out a laugh. Then he stepped closer to her, his eyes barely above hers as his stare bore into them. He spoke in a low, dark tone. "You really are your father's daughter. So arrogant." Andraya held his stare. "You would know a lot about that, now wouldn't you, Chancellor?" Dolion smirked and folded his arms. "Who is this new lucky gentleman? And may I remind you, he cannot be a foreign royal," he said, with a sideways glance toward Prince Stefan. "I chose Mr. Besnick." "Besnick?" Dolion bellowed. The room fell silent again, and Andraya resisted the urge to cover her ringing ears. "Yes, my lord?" Besnick asked. "This is madness!" Dolion shouted, throwing his arms in the air. He turned to call Marquis Draven, who now stood at the far side of the room. "Your Grace, please! Let's get on with our business. This woman is out of her mind." Andraya's heart pounded with fury. "Excuse me, sir! This is my royal court!" Andraya shouted. "Hudson, remove this man." Dolion whirled around as Hudson marched forward. For one split second, Dolion took in Hudson's massive frame, gigantic arms, and large hands. He gave him a ghastly look. "This is outrageous!" He lifted a raised finger high in the air. "I motion to vote Queen Andraya out of the head crown position. Who's with me?" he hollered. A few in the crowd called, "Aye, aye!" while others shouted, "No!" Just as Hudson had his hands on Dolion's shoulders, Andraya lifted a palm. "Wait, Hudson." Hudson turned his enormous blonde head in her direction. He let go of his grasp, but still kept a loose hand on Dolion's arm. "Upon what grounds, Chancellor?" Andraya said coolly. "I don't need to explain myself," Dolion said through gritted teeth. He yanked his arm free and took one step away from Hudson. "If the majority says yes, then you are finished." Andraya willed herself to remain calm, as she reminded herself she had expected something like this to happen. Dolion's falsely perceived ignorance of her was what she counted on. Andraya inched her way toward him. "You say only a majority is required?" Dolion rolled his eyes. "Yes, madam." "Do you really think I do not know the law of my own kingdom, Chancellor? Or is it that you do not know it?" Dolion's chest heaved with anger. "You believe I do not know the law?" "Clearly you do not," Andraya snapped. "And you do," Dolion yelled. Andraya smirked. "Lord Bartholomew," Andraya said. "Yes, your majesty?" Bartholomew replied in his squeaky voice. "Will you please read what the framed certificate says on the wall?" Yes, your majesty." "When did that get there?" Dolion asked. "Continue, my lord," Andraya said. Bartholomew cleared his throat loudly. "This elite certificate of law is awarded to Queen Andraya Callista Alvaro Cesare. Only those who have passed each and every island kingdom's rigorous law test will achieve this highly elite award." Silence filled the room once more. But it was a new kind of silence, inspired by a new kind of awe. Dolion's jaw clenched and unclenched. He obviously did not know this about the Queen. "Perhaps, gentlemen," she said, addressing the entire group, "you might now believe me when I say that not only does the law require a unanimous vote to rule me out of my title, but the council may not even make the motion to do so without sound reason. And none of those reasons include being inexperienced, a woman, or an abolitionist." "Benjamin!" she called. And just as she expected, her faithful footman, whom she had trusted to stand by, entered the room carrying the biggest book the palace library kept. Chaldean Law. "Bring the book here, please," she said, without taking her eyes off Dolion. "You may check for yourself, Chancellor." "This is just a ruse," Dolion spat. "You know we don't have time to search that 1,000-page book." Andraya lifted her chin. "Turn to page 237, Benjamin, and let the Chancellor read the second paragraph." Benjamin obeyed and handed the book to Dolion. The Queen could see by the jump in his jaw that he did not like that she was right. Then his eyes turned skeptical. "You planned this. Who told you we were taking a vote today?" His eyes flickered to Alvin, who stood as stoic as ever in the corner. For one terrifying second, Andraya feared she had given Alvin away. She offered Dolion the most callous look she could manage and said, "Being as intelligent as you are, Chancellor, you are not very smart. You told me yourself this morning. Or did you not think I would understand the meaning of your warning?" Dolion's eyes darkened. Then he shook his head. "This would have taken study. And we spoke not an hour ago. And I know during that time you were getting dressed." He gave her a swift look over. Andraya shot him a wicked grin. She lifted her chin and her posture higher. "You may not know this about me, Chancellor, but I do not forget anything I read. I can picture it precisely once I try to recall it." Dolion smirked. "Really? Have you read this entire book on Chaldean law, then?" Andraya nodded. "Then tell me this," he said, as he thumbed through some pages. "What is the remainder of this sentence? The royal army has authority to—" He looked up at her expectantly. Andraya had to focus a moment before she saw the paragraph in her mind's eye, then said, "To discipline subjects as they see fit, as long as a report is given to the Marquis of their region, who then presents it to the Justice faction of the Royal Council if necessary. If necessary is in parentheses." Dolion gave her a deep scowl. He flipped to various random pages and quizzed Andraya the same way, and she answered them all with flawlessness. Andraya grinned at the dropped jaws in the room, and she enjoyed very much that Prince Stefan's grin spread unmistakably wide. "I think we can all agree this knowledge of hers has not been acquired in one day's time," Besnik announced, "and she has certainly proved that she is capable of what her title requires." "No one asked you," Dolion spat. "My new royal advisor may speak whenever he wants," Andraya snapped back. "Besnik, as a royal advisor, madam," Marquis Draven called with contempt. "The law says a royal advisor need only be a court official, Your Grace." "Would you like to verify that?" she asked, motioning with her head to the massive book in Dolion's hands. The Marquis responded with a heavy sigh. "I know that there are several truly noble men in this room who would never dream of disregarding royal law, no matter how much money was offered them," Andraya said. A few vigorous nods scattered the room. Draven placed a hand on his chest. "Are you accusing me of being underhanded?" "I am simply stating a fact," Andraya said. "Now, gentlemen, please, let us sit and get to work. Hudson, you may now remove the Chancellor." And that concludes Chapter 8. Thank you for joining me to listen to Queen Andraya. I hope you come back next Thursday for Chapter 9, which is called Race to Unrest. If you want to find out more about Brenda's books, you can visit brendasbooks.net. Until next time, take care.